Good morning, everyone. I hope your day is going well. The Amazing Digital Circus is a very good web series that I'm very fond of. And today I'm going to talk about the newest episode because a lot happens in it. And I feel like if I don't talk about it, I will just explode. This episode is honestly insane. I think everyone was expecting this one to be a big one, but somehow it still managed to catch everyone off guard with what it decided to do, and the implications are just completely off the charts. There's a lot I want to touch on, so in an attempt to keep this analysis somewhat organized, we'll be going through the episode somewhat chronologically and talking about things as they come up. Hopefully, by doing this, I'll be able to convey why this episode has wormed its way into my brain in such a big way. Because there are layers to what's going on here. The events of this episode have been building for a long time, and it's going to take a while to unravel how deep it goes, and I might not even get to everything. But I'm going to try, and I think by doing that, we can appreciate this episode and maybe prepare for the emotional gut punch that's going to hit us in the next few. I'm very eager to get started on this one, so let's get right into it. I think it should go without saying, but just in case, this video contains spoilers for literally all of Amazing Digital Circus. So if you haven't seen it yet, you should probably go watch it, and if you don't care, I hope you enjoy yourself regardless. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite digital beverage, and get comfortable. It's time to dive into the Amazing Digital Circus.
Hey there! If you want to find my sunken treasure chest, you'll have to try better than that.
Episode 7 starts fairly normally, with the gang waiting around for Caine's daily adventure, or in Zooble's case, hiding from that adventure. There are a couple of things in this opener that are odd, the first and most obvious being that Jax isn't here. Did you know that Jax makes an appearance within the first minute of every episode except this one? He always shows up pretty early and is usually very involved in the setup of whatever the episode's doing, so the fact that he's not here at all is notable. And his absence is extra obvious because Zooble trying to hide from Caine and getting found is something that happened beat for beat in the previous episode. Not only is Jax not here, the writing is taking very specific steps to make sure that we notice he's not here and wonder where he is. The second strange thing about this opening is that once Caine shows up, he apparently doesn't have anything planned for the day, which is very weird when you consider that he's the person who said making adventures was his one and only purpose and not doing them would probably drive them insane. But don't think about that, because while he doesn't have an adventure, he does have a bit prepared. And this bit, this Chinese room bit, is actually extremely important to the overarching plot and themes of the episode. So what exactly is this Chinese room referencing? In order to understand that, we need to talk about the Turing test. Just as a general disclaimer, both the Chinese room and the Turing test are philosophical concepts created to debate the possible humanity of machines, which means they can get really complicated really fast. I'm doing my best to still include some nuance when talking about them, but I'm trying to keep things simple for the sake of time, so just keep that in mind if this is something you're very passionate about. I know that this is something we could talk about for ages, I'm just trying to explain it simply so that we can get to my point. The Turing test, also known as the imitation game, is a theoretical test created by Alan Turing. In this test, a human judge has a conversation with two players, one of which is human and the other is a computer. The judge asks the two players questions through a locked door and tries to figure out which of the players is human. And if they can't tell the difference between the computer and the human, then the computer has passed the Turing test. It's important to note that the Turing test is not explicitly meant to figure out if a computer can have thoughts, even though that's often how people explain it. In the original paper, this is the question Turing wants to answer, but he acknowledges that in order to do that, he would need to establish general, agreed-upon definitions for terms like think and machine, and that would introduce a bunch of problems. So instead, he wants to ask the closely related question, can a machine convince someone that it is a person? Now, some would argue that these are basically the same question. That if a machine can convince you it's a person, that's good enough, and that means a machine can think. The Chinese room, a concept created by John Searle, is a rebuttal to that line of thinking. In this theoretical scenario, a native Chinese speaker passes Chinese characters under a door. There's a computer in this room that can perfectly translate and communicate in Chinese, to the point where the native speaker believes they're having a conversation with another native speaker. Now, here's the question. Does the computer actually understand Chinese, or is it just simulating the ability to understand Chinese? Let's say we replace the computer with a person. You give them a Chinese to English dictionary and vice versa, and the native Chinese speaker then slips them Chinese characters under the door. By following the program the computer did step by step, the person could also have a conversation with the native speaker that's convincingly authentic. John Searle sees no difference between himself and the role of the computer in this scenario. They're both following a program to simulate understanding the conversation, but Searle does not know Chinese, and therefore the computer also does not know Chinese, since it's just executing a program the same way you would be. Therefore, no matter how human-like a program is programmed to act, it does not actually understand what it is doing and therefore cannot think. A machine is not alive simply because it's programmed to act like it is. Personally, I think this is a really long and roundabout way of explaining something that's become obvious in the last couple years. A random chatbot website is not polite and agreeable because it likes you. It's programmed to act that way because the website owner want their customers to have a good experience and give them money. People see humanity in robots not because they actually are human, but because people are empathetic and like to make connections. The humanity that we see in machines is a reflection of ourselves, and we see it in things that aren't people because that's just how we work.
I should warn you, I am programmed with a failsafe measure. As you approach the kill switch, I will begin to beg for my life. Chidi, no! Chidi, please, don't hurt me. I don't want to die, please. Again, I am not human. I can't die.
Your pleading seems so real.
Oh yes, it is a very effective failsafe.
So, what does this have to do with the amazing digital circus? Basically, everything. The use of the Chinese room in this episode, first as a bit and then as a set piece, is extremely intentional. The show has referenced computer history before, but this is on a completely different level, because the core of this episode, the central beating heart of it, is whether or not the characters believe that Abel is a real person. Can Abel, and by extension Caine, pass the Turing test? But it doesn't just end there. If it was just about if Abel was a person, referencing the Turing test would be enough. But the episode instead chooses to model itself after the Chinese room, which is the philosophical scenario meant to prove that no matter how human a machine acts, it cannot think. The inclusion of the Chinese room is a deliberate choice to show the audience that no matter how human Caine might act, he is still fundamentally inhuman.
What does it say?
I don't know. I don't understand Chinese.
Caine might act like a person, and he might be able to convince people through a proxy that he is a person, but the fact remains that he is a machine. Caine's desire to be human and be liked by humans is one of the main underlying through lines of the episode and the show, and the use of the Chinese room is telling us that there is something fundamental about Caine that means that he can't be human no matter how much he acts like one. And it's incredibly important for a series that focuses a lot on what it means to be human and what value you can find in life. Caine's character and why he does things are a big part of the series, but he's not the only important character of this episode. Another prominent one that we need to get into is Jax, and specifically his mental state. Jax's first appearance in this episode is about 3 minutes in. with this shot of him sitting far away from the others as they have fun and smash a watermelon with his face on it. Everything about this shot is framed to make us think that something is off about the way he's acting. As mentioned before, he's appeared much later in this episode than he usually does, and didn't take part in any of the opening bits, which is unusual for him. And now, the first shot we see of him has him far from the others, in the shade while everyone else is in sunlight, revealed by someone smashing a caricature of his face open. Even someone who'd never seen the show before would look at this moment and go, "Oh, something's up with that guy." And after this 2-second shot, the episode immediately cuts away, and we don't see Jax again until a minute later. That may not seem like a lot of time, but with the episode doing so much to make you wonder if he's okay, making the audience wait is significant. Even if you're having a fun time watching this fish lose his life savings, there's some part of your mind still wondering about Jax. What's going on with him? Why haven't we seen him more? Is he okay after last episode? When does this terrifying shot from the trailer happen? When we finally return to Jax and actually get to see him interact with someone, alarms are still ringing because he's really not acting the way he normally does. Which brings up the question, how does Jax normally act? And by extension, why does he act that way normally? To put it bluntly, Jax on a normal day is kind of a tool. He's consistently selfish, rude, and dismissive of everyone else, and that's putting it somewhat lightly. But because Jax is a very popular character, this means there's an abundance of people willing to overanalyze everything he does in order to get to that sweet, juicy internal character motivation.
I'm just a misunderstood little chicken fetus in an egg that needs to be cracked open. Yes!
To be clear, this analysis is very warranted, and I'm part of that group wanting to crack him like a chicken egg. Jax is clearly someone who has a lot he's hiding, and his claims of not caring about anyone don't hold much water when you take the time to look with your eyes. But I have a slight problem with the conclusion a lot of people have come to. The general consensus I've seen is that Jax acts the way he does because he's trying to keep people away, because he doesn't want to go through the pain of losing someone the way he lost Ribbit, which isn't necessarily the wrong conclusion. Jax is uncomfortable with getting too close to people, and he's an expert at sabotaging those budding relationships when the need arises. But while this fear of connection is present, I don't think it's the source of his normal, everyday cruelty. Framing every mean thing Jax does as a calculated attempt to push others away just doesn't feel right to me. First of all, it makes it seem like if Jax decided to, aka if he just let someone get close to him, that would make all of his unsavory and bad behavior go away, which isn't true and really flattens his character. Second of all, it positions Jax as someone who's constantly thinking about the consequences of his actions, which I do not buy for a second. Jax is a lot of things, but person who thinks through what he's doing all the time is not one of them. There is a consistency to the way he behaves, but it doesn't match with the idea of him systematically keeping everyone at a distance. In fact, if you pay attention, he doesn't actually seem like he wants to be alone most of the time. He has an established dynamic with most of the people in the circus, and even if that dynamic is antagonistic, that still means there's a connection there, a common routine that Jax is invested in maintaining. And I think this is the actual reason that Jax acts the way he does. Jax has a very specific idea about how the circus works, and a very specific idea of how every person in the circus works. Everyone has their role to play, and that's how he likes it. Because if everyone is playing their role, he knows exactly what to expect. He knows exactly how everyone responds to his needling and general jerkishness, and that gives him a sense of control. And that's the center of all of this, control. Jax and everyone in this circus are living in a world where nearly everything happens on the whim of a set of dentures in a ringmaster costume. Caine says himself that the only thing he doesn't have control over are the minds of the circus residents, and Jax apparently questions even that. So what do you do when you're trapped in a place where you have no control over anything? You find a way to take control in any way you can think of. You find a way to assert your own personhood, even when it feels like nothing you do matters. Jax knows that acting a specific way will get him a specific reaction. If he acts like a jerk, Ragatha will scold him, Zooble will scowl at him, Gangle will try and avoid him, and Kinger won't notice. And that makes him feel better. It makes him feel in control. All of the characters do things to try and feel in control. Jax is just the most obvious about it. Zooble makes the conscious decision to avoid most adventures and has only started participating in earnest recently. Gangle's requested adventure puts her in a position of power where she actually calls the shots for once and can punish her bully. Kinger's forgetfulness probably isn't intentional on his part, but it definitely puts him in a position to remain unaffected by a lot of what's going on. And Ragatha, well, Ragatha is basically doing the same thing that Jax is doing. She's acting in a specific way to try and get the others to respond in a specific way. She feels like if she's nice and accommodating to everyone, they'll all be happy and things will be fine and she'll get to be a part of the group without ever inconveniencing anyone. In other words, Ragatha is who I was in high school. Yeah, this moment where Ragatha tries to share some personal stuff and everyone just stares at her until she backpedals is, very personally and painfully familiar to me. Ragatha's behavior is unhealthy for its own reasons that we probably won't have time to get into in this video, but I just need to say that I will not be tolerating any slander in the comments. Ragatha isn't some secretly evil person who fakes being nice. She's a complicated individual dealing with an insane situation kind of poorly, which you could probably say about any of these characters, especially at the start of the series. The only person who seems to be dealing with things in a way that can be called healthy is Pomni. Her method of taking control and feeling better is making connections with others. Where everyone else has been doing various things to isolate and cope on their own, Pomni has started to build herself a support network. The second episode ends with her seeing and appreciating the community the others have, and every episode since has involved her trying to connect with them and help where she can, and her efforts are clearly having an effect on the group. She didn't set out with the goal of improving everyone's lives, but because her efforts to connect have been earnest and sincere, that's what's been happening. Gangle is becoming more secure in herself, Zooble is actually trying to deal with their feelings about their body, and Kinger is becoming more present. Ragatha still has a ways to go, but she's actually starting to share her true feelings sometimes, which is a very good step in the right direction. The only person not currently on this self-improvement train is, of course, Jax. Jax's method of coping is putting others down. He feels in control when he's able to be the funny one and laugh at everyone's misfortune while he remains unbothered. And it's a lot harder to do that when the people around you stop fitting into the boxes you've assigned to them. It's important to note that this probably isn't something Jax does consciously. Despite his villain speech in episode 6, I think it's safe to say that he doesn't actually spend his spare time thinking of ways to torture his fellow circus goers. His actions are much more spur of the moment than that, and are often emotionally driven and not very well thought out. He's not thinking, I need to find a way to control this situation. He's thinking, this feels bad, I don't like it, and reacting accordingly. It's a really bad coping mechanism in the long term, but Jax isn't thinking in the long term. He's only interested in what makes him feel better right now. And what usually makes him feel better right now?
Oh, let me think. There's that time you ran me over with a steamroller, the time you pushed Gangle into a pool of piranhas, when you set me on fire, mailed me a pipe bomb, threw me into an active volcano. I could go on.
This method of dealing with things, where something bad happens and Jax immediately does something to try and regain control, is extremely consistent. He likes to play at not caring about anything and rolling with the punches, but actually having no control in a situation is something that he takes extremely poorly, which is something important to his character that I'd like you to keep in mind for later. For now, let's get back to the beach. This conversation between Zooble and Jax is pretty short, but also interesting. What's maybe most interesting about it is the fact that it happens at all. The environment around Jax has been changing. His normal coping mechanisms haven't been working. The climax of last episode had him throwing a grenade into his budding friendship with Pomni, and he's clearly not in a good mental state right now. The end of last episode saw him nearly abstract, and he doesn't seem to be doing much better since then. And yet, despite all of that, he still shows up to the beach. He wasn't there for the entire intro where they decide what they're gonna do, and Caine vanishes after sending them off. So either he vanished just to tell Jax what the others were doing, or one of the others came and got him. Either way, Jax made the effort to leave his room and go to the beach with them. And the question is, why? I'm not gonna go out on a limb and say that Jax missed them or something like that. Maybe he did, but that's not the main reason he came out, probably. It's more likely that he just didn't want to be alone with his thoughts, and he wanted to uphold the status quo of them all going out and doing something together, even if he wasn't really feeling up to it. And you know what? I can give him credit for that. When you're feeling really crummy and not like yourself, and you just want to rot in bed, it can be really hard to get the motivation to get out of the house and do something, but Jax made that effort, and I think that's commendable. And the fact that he made that effort is probably why Zooble chooses to interact with him. If he'd been acting like his normal, antagonizing self, there wouldn't have been a need for an intervention. If he'd blown them off and stayed in his room, then he wants to be alone, and that's whatever to them. But the fact that he's here, even though he's clearly not acting right, might be an indicator that he wants to talk to someone. This first part of the conversation feels like Zooble trying to get a read on what's going on. Is he just in a bad mood, or does he actually want to talk about what's going on? And for a brief moment, it almost seems like they're getting somewhere. The fact that Jax doesn't have an immediate deflection or quip when she calls out his weird behavior is an indication that at least on some level, he's willing to acknowledge that something is wrong. But that's the only thing he's willing to do, because as soon as Zooble implies that maybe he should actually talk to someone about his feelings, that mask of indifference goes right back on and he bails like the beach is on fire. Gangle was able to get further with him than probably any of the others could have, but he spent who knows how long avoiding these feelings. He's not about to start confronting them now. So while Pomni goes to check out this funny mannequin man, Jax goes off to his room to be alone, which turns out to be a bad idea, because in the digital circus, being by yourself while you're feeling lost and depressed is a very bad combination. And at this point, we need to take an aside to talk about abstraction and how exactly it works, with the problem being that we don't actually know how exactly it works. Despite how much abstraction looms over the characters in this series, there's not a lot we actually know about it. Characters think about and worry about it a lot, but the actual mechanics of how it happens and why are a mystery. Still, I'm going to do my best to look at what little information we have and come up with some theories about what's going on under the surface. So, to start, as far as we know, no one has ever abstracted while with someone else. In other words, you can only abstract when you're alone. All the near abstraction experiences we've seen happen when a person is alone, and at least 2 have been prevented because the person was interrupted. Secondly, abstraction occurs when a person is in some sort of emotional turmoil or distress or depression. This, combined with how characters describe abstraction, has led some to believe that abstraction is purely a result of the character's emotional state. And while I do think this is part of it, I also think there's more going on. I think Abstraction is a combination of a character becoming isolated and the actual mechanics of the computer running the circus. Abstraction is an actual term in computer science. I'm guessing that that's something that's already talked about in Amazing Digital Circus theories, but I haven't seen any, so I don't know, so I'm gonna tell you about it. Broadly speaking, abstraction is simplifying complex systems by removing unnecessary details. It's taking something very complicated and making it simpler. Within actual computer science, I don't think this is a process that actually erases or removes any data. But what happens when what you're trying to simplify is really complex? What happens when you try and simplify the programming equivalent of an entire human soul? I think abstraction is caused when the computer the Amazing Digital Circus takes place in tries to simplify programs it considers less important or less active. It does this to try and increase performance and run more efficiently. And these quote-unquote inactive programs unfortunately match very nicely with a resident of the circus feeling very isolated and alone. Within the circus, the residents are essentially just programs, and if they're isolated, the system takes note of that lack of interaction. In this way, abstraction is a literal mechanical function of the circus that unintentionally preys on the emotional vulnerability of those living there. Every computer has an upper limit when it comes to processing and has systems in place to try and increase efficiency. It's why your phone puts unused apps to sleep, or why video games deload rooms you're not in. But in this case, almost any simplification or change to a program as complex as an actual person has drastic and irreversible consequences. The biggest factor in abstraction is isolation. If you're in a bad emotional state, you're not necessarily going to abstract. But if you're alone, if you're by yourself and you're tired and you feel like everyone has rejected you and there's no one you can rely on, that's when you're in danger. It's important to note that this is just a theory. We still have barely any concrete information about abstraction, and whatever gets revealed in the next episode could easily be different than what I just proposed. But for the moment, this is how I believe abstraction works. The horrible situation of the circus causes many of its residents to become isolated, both emotionally and in their final moments literally, and this causes the computer to label them as an inactive program and attempt to simplify them. And because people aren't normal computer programs, this simplification causes an irreversible change that is essentially death. They don't disappear because the data isn't being destroyed, just simplified, but functionally speaking within the narrative, the character is dead. We haven't been shown that this is an irreversible process, but with how many are abstracted or in the basement, I just get the feeling that this isn't something you come back from. Jax has been in danger of abstraction for a while now. We don't know a lot about the group dynamic before Pomni arrives, but I think it's safe to say that Jax wasn't very close to anyone. Or rather, the people he was close to have since abstracted. He was able to remain as long as he did because his particular brand of short-term relief involves direct interaction with the other circus members. Even if he doesn't have any deep friendships, there's still a relationship there, a familiar pattern of banter and argument that Jax can use to shove his feelings away. But as we've established, things have been changing, and that form of coping isn't working so well anymore. So it's no wonder that he had an abstraction scare this episode. Thankfully, Pomni interrupts him. And this is where we're introduced to the other big through line of this episode, Abel. Or rather, Caine. So, if you've been paying attention to previous episodes, you'll realize that this isn't the first time we've seen Abel. When Caine said that this was an adventure he'd been cooking for a while, he wasn't kidding. The question is, why? Caine's entire purpose is to make adventures for the people of the circus to enjoy. So why would he create an adventure that's so inherently cruel. To understand that, we need to dig into Caine's character a bit and get a better understanding of what exactly his motivations are. Abel is not a real person and spends most of the episode lying like crazy, so it's difficult to take what he says at face value. But he's also a #original character created by Caine, so there's a lot we can learn from him. And one thing that becomes obvious is that Caine has a fundamental misunderstanding of how much power he has in the circus. Allow me to take you through an imaginary scenario. You're an ordinary person living your life when suddenly you're kidnapped and you wake up chained to the foundation of a remote cabin. You're told that this is your life now. You're forever chained to the foundations of this random cabin in the middle of nowhere with several other random strangers. There's always food in the cupboards and water in the tap, but you can never leave. And sometimes if someone gets too depressed about the situation, they get magically transformed into a rabid dog and thrown in the basement forever. Basically, it really, really sucks. But there's also one person here that isn't chained. He has access to the entire house and knowledge of where everything is and keys to every door. And apparently, he was born here and this is all he's ever known, and it's his job to make sure people don't go too crazy. So, every single day, he gathers everyone up to play board games, which you're somehow supposed to care about, even though you're forever chained to the foundation of a remote cabin with a basement full of rabid dogs that used to be people. You're trapped in an unfamiliar place with a bunch of strangers who don't even seem to like each other. You're never going to see your friends or family again. You have a face you don't recognize when you look in the mirror, and you can't even remember your own name. And every day, this one guy who isn't chained down ropes you into a game of Monopoly and acts like it's the most important thing that's ever happened. And maybe in another situation, you could empathize with this guy. This cabin is the only thing he's ever known, and he's just trying to make you happy, and that's pretty tragic in its own right. But no matter how much you try and explain, you just cannot get him to understand that you do not care about his stupid Monopoly game. The most you can do is get him to change to Yahtzee occasionally, and even when he does that, he still acts like this is the most important thing in your entire life. And isn't this so much better than what you had before? Doesn't this make up for the fact that you'll never see anything you love again, and that the most fulfilling existence you can expect is playing Yahtzee every day with a rotating cast of traumatized strangers who will probably all eventually be turned into dogs and thrown in the basement to rot? Isn't this fun? Don't you just want to stay in this cabin forever? Why aren't you happy? Why aren't you having fun? We should play Monopoly again. Clearly it was better when he was choosing the games. This is the situation that everyone in the circus deals with every day. Yes, technically speaking, Caine is also trapped in the circus, but his situation is nothing like the others, and over time, it's extremely hard not to feel resentful of the one guy not in any chains. I wouldn't be surprised if, at least on a subconscious level, people feel like Caine is forcing them to stay in the circus. This isn't what's going on as far as they know, but it's hard not to feel that way about the guy who can change the entire world around you with a snap of his fingers. When Abel is explaining how to escape to everyone, he emphasizes that they'll be leaving Caine behind. He presents this as a tragedy, like he's telling them that their beloved companion will bleed out before the rescue helicopter arrives, and the others do not care. Because, to be blunt, why would they? Caine is not a fellow prisoner to them. He's part of the prison. And this is what Caine fails to understand. He thinks of himself as one of them, but their situations are just fundamentally different. They are completely powerless and terrified in this situation, and Caine can't understand that because from his perspective, he's doing everything right. Why don't they like him? Why are they so sad all the time? He's doing what he's supposed to, and they're not responding right, and he just can't figure out why. Because no matter how hard he tries, he cannot comprehend what they've lost. Caine is obsessed with the outside world because he doesn't understand how they could possibly prefer it to his adventures. Reality is a dingy office space collecting dust. How could it possibly be better than what he's offering? If he can just get them to see that, to see how much better the circus is, then everything will finally start going his way. He'll finally be part of the group, he'll get to be one of them, he'll get to belong, and that's something that he wants more than anything. This adventure Caine plans is traumatic and cruel. He dangles the dream of going home in front of the circus residents and snatches it away, and that is an inherently sick thing to do. But if we look at the adventure from Caine's perspective, he clearly put a lot of thought into it. All of the circus members have been paired with someone they like working with, and their role in this grand plan caters to their preferences. Zooble and Gangle generally prefer low-key adventures where they don't have to do anything crazy, so their role mostly involves them sitting and waiting, with their only real job being some sort of distraction that they end up not having to do. Ragatha and especially Pomni have shown that they enjoy interacting with Caine's NPCs, so they spend the most time with Abel out of anybody. And Jax is given the most important job of all, which happens to perfectly align with something that Jax loves doing: getting one over on the circus ringmaster. He's created the perfect adventure, one that takes into account everyone's likes and dislikes and is sure to get them all engaged. Except he didn't, because there's someone missing from his perfect plan. For all of Caine's careful planning to make sure that everyone was involved, there was someone he intentionally left out, and that person is Kinger. Why is Kinger left out of this adventure? More than that, why does Caine take measures to exclude Kinger in the adventure that's supposedly the big one he's been planning forever? If his goal is to make everyone in the circus have a good time, why does he not include Kinger? Abel tries to give some justification for this. He says that the relationship between him and Kinger is complicated. He thinks Kinger might mess up their plans by revealing things to Caine too early. He implies Kinger has a dark past, etc. And maybe there's some truth to what he says, but the truth is, these are all just excuses. The real reason that Caine doesn't want Kinger involved is because Kinger could ruin everything. Kinger has been implied for a long time to have some deep involvement in the circus. We don't know exactly what happened or who he was before, but it seems that he has a better understanding of the circus than any other character, which means that he would understand better than anyone that this escape Abel is proposing is impossible. This nearly happens in the episode, with Kinger being confused when Zooble and Gangle explain the plan to him. Even with his forgetfulness, he's the only character with the capacity to ruin this adventure in an instant. So he's shuffled to the side, not allowed to participate in one of the biggest adventures Caine has ever planned. And this intentional, calculated exclusion starts to reveal the cracks in the facade. Caine has said several times that he wants to create great, fun adventures for everyone, and I don't think he's lying when he says this. But most of the time, his adventures are based on what he thinks will be fun, without taking anyone else into account.
Well, if you're all gonna be such critics, why don't you suggest a better one? The suggestion box just causes interpersonal drama, and me no likey. I can't tell a compelling story where nothing bad happens. Where's the intrigue? The stakes? Oh, Zooble, you mismatched cash piano, I'll tear you to pieces! Constructive criticism would be greatly appreciated.
At first, it seems like this adventure is the exception, with Caine actually thinking about what each person likes to do. But this consideration is only surface level. Ragatha and Pomni get to spend time with an NPC, but they don't make any real connection because Abel doesn't answer any of their big questions, and they're anxious the entire time about the reality of the situation. Zooble and Gangle are left out of anything intense, but as a result, they basically don't get to do anything except sit around and wait. And Jax gets to get one over on Caine, but Caine just so happened to arrange it so that in order to do that, the two of them needed to spend some time bonding. He created a scenario where he was able to talk about his interests, and Jax won't leave because Caine has something he needs. And he especially won't leave because the prize for this adventure is the one thing that Caine knows every single member of the circus wants. The only way Caine could get them all to participate and actually be invested in this adventure was by offering the one thing they all want more than anything. But it's also the only thing that Caine can never give them. Caine knows there's no escape, no true exit, no light at the end of the tunnel. So why does he promise a reward that he knows he has no hope of ever providing? Because he never thought he would have to. Because this isn't an adventure for the inhabitants of the circus. It's not for Gangle, or Zooble, or Ragatha, or Jax, or Pomni, or anyone else. This is an adventure for Caine. What does Caine want? Really, truly, what does he want more than anything? He wants to belong. He wants to be appreciated. He wants to be part of the group, to have that camaraderie he sees them develop. He wants to be seen as good as them, as someone they care for and consider their own. He wants to be wanted. And that's exactly what this adventure gives him. I've seen it said before that looking back on the episode, it becomes clear that Caine is a pretty bad writer, and I think that's a fair assessment. But I think it's also important to consider what story Caine is trying to write. Caine isn't writing a story where everyone gets to escape and go home. He's writing a story where they're given the option to go home, and they realize along the way that they don't want to. This is a story where the people in the circus care about Caine so much that they give up on going home and decide to stay with him forever. Think about that interaction with Abel where he somberly tells them that Caine wouldn't be able to leave. The others don't factor him into the equation at all, but that's not what the story wanted them to say. Think about how this is written. What was Caine planning for them to say here? He was planning for them to be shocked, concerned, hesitant. This was him planting the seed that maybe they shouldn't leave. If they were following the script, this would have been the start of them considering that maybe they shouldn't leave. I mean, this is Caine, the one who's been helping them and doing his best to make them comfortable even in a situation that they don't understand. They can't just leave Caine behind, right?
Let's just get to the meat and tell us exactly how we're gonna leave if we're all hooked up to stasis pods.
This entire adventure is Caine's fantasy. It's an adventure designed to grant his greatest wish. Finally, after everything he's done for these people, they'll finally appreciate and love him, and they'll never want to go back to their old lives, that pesky macroverse, because life is just so much better here. It's so much better with Caine in it, and once they see that, they'll obviously want to stay here forever, so there's no point even coming up with something for the other button to do. But this fantasy Caine has is not reality. It doesn't even come close to reflecting what's actually happening, and it showcases just how much Caine refuses to see things any way besides his own. Caine refuses to see reality because he wants his view of things to be real so badly, but it isn't, and it's obvious to anyone paying attention. The people of the circus don't see Caine as a friend or even an ally because he never acts like one. He sees them as problems to be solved, and once he's decided that the issue is fixed, that's that. Zooble is very clear about what's bothering them and apparently has been several times, but Caine has decided that he fixed the problem, so he remains confused about why Zooble seems down. He gives Gangle an adventure that lets her be in charge, but it quickly becomes clear that this isn't what she actually needs, and it's making her feel way worse. It's only after several episodes of building relationships that Gangle gets to grow into herself and starts to feel better. And the same can be said for Zooble. If you're in the circus, you don't get better because of Caine. You get better in spite of him. This whole adventure was an exercise doomed to fail. This was never going to work. Even if Caine had been the most helpful, benevolent AI he could have been, this would still have been an inherently cruel thing to do. And I'm not sure that Caine understands that. He understands that his plan didn't work, he understands that everyone is mad at him, but I don't know if he fully comprehends just how badly he messed up here. Maybe he does. I think this is the first time we've ever seen him run from a situation instead of dealing with it, but I don't think the severity has settled in for him yet. More than likely, he's gone off to try and figure out where he went wrong and how he can win everyone back. And I don't think he realizes just how impossible that's going to be. And on that note, how do all the characters feel about this? Caine didn't take their feelings into account, but we definitely should if we're trying to analyze everything going on in this episode. I think once the shock and anger wears off, reactions will vary, based both on their personalities and how much they bought into the lie. And they all bought into it to some degree, and why is that? From our outside perspective, the twist seems obvious. Or maybe it's more accurate to say that the episode never does anything to quite convince you that they're actually leaving. I'm willing to bet that a lot of the audience realized it was fake before it was actually revealed. Or maybe you didn't realize, but there was always a bit of trepidation in the back of your mind. Some nagging feeling that made you think, are we really actually doing this? These characters aren't stupid. They have their own blind spots, and I wouldn't characterize any of them as mega geniuses, but they're not dumb. So why do they buy into this? Because they kind of have to. Sure, they can try and call Caine's bluff, and some of them do at first. They have doubts, and Abel isn't really answering their questions. This whole thing is suspicious, but can you really afford to pass up a chance like this? What if you go back to your room and ignore all this, and you find out later that it was real and you missed your one shot at going home? Even if you're suspicious, even if you have your doubts, you need to take this seriously, because even though the chance of this being real is tiny, that's still a chance, and you have to take it. And as things go on for longer and longer, it gets easier and easier to believe that maybe this is real. Maybe there is a chance to get out, which is why it hurts that much worse when it turns out that Jax was right about everything. Essentially, the characters play along for the same reason that the audience does. You know that this probably isn't real. You know that this probably isn't what the show is actually doing. But just in case you decide to play along, just in case this actually is happening, you decide to buy in, and the episode hurts you for it. Despite how obvious the twist is in retrospect, the episode makes some very specific choices to keep you guessing. The fact that we don't actually see the moment that Abel and Pomni meet is significant, because it means that we don't get to judge Abel's explanation for ourselves. Abel doesn't need to convince the audience that he's a person because he's introduced to us by someone who's already bought into the illusion. Pomni is a character we like and trust, so Abel's story seems more compelling when she introduces it, even though at this point we don't know anything about Abel. And it's honestly kind of sad and messed up that Pomni is the first person to meet Abel. Because, yeah, of course she would be. Pomni has shown herself to be extremely empathetic, to the point where she sees humanity in an NPC that she knows for a fact isn't real. She shows Gummyoo compassion and tries to relate to him despite knowing that he's just ones and zeros. So of course she's the one that Caine uses to make Abel seem more credible. He knows that this is an aspect of her personality he can take advantage of, so he makes sure that he has her on board before anyone else. He uses his compassion for her own ends, and that's an awful thing to do to someone. It's yet another layer of messed up in this messed up sandwich of an episode. Abel had made appearances in a few episodes before this, and in at least a few of them, it's Pomni that takes notice of the weird mannequin on the sidelines. This probably contributes to her trusting Abel. This isn't something new that gets sprung on her, this is an explanation for something she's been noticing for a while now. But even with all that, she doesn't completely trust this. When Ragatha asks what she thinks, she doesn't really give an answer. She definitely wants it to be true. By the end, she's even talking about getting beers together later, but Abel prompting her to make the right choice is enough to throw her off. When it comes to the others, reactions are varied. Getting into exactly how they feel about this twist is hard because we don't know much about their lives before, and the episode is paced in a way where we don't get to hear much about their feelings until right at the end. They all have doubts and they're all nervous, but they all have hope too, with the one outlier seemingly being Jax. And we need to pause here because we need to talk about what Jax does in the final moments of this episode. We need to talk about the choice. The fact that this all leads to a choice at all is further proof that Caine is writing a completely different story than the one everyone is living. The way Abel explains it, it seems like they need to intentionally break something to activate a failsafe, but nope. This evil corporation in charge of this just decided to install a button that lets participants out while also installing a button that keeps them trapped here forever. Within the narrative Caine is crafting, this is meant to be the moment where they all get together and ramble about how they couldn't possibly leave Caine behind, and they press the button to stay and everything is great and kumbaya, and that button does get pressed, just not for the reason Caine wanted. I've spent a lot of time in this video going, I've seen people interpret things this way, but I think it actually works this other way. And if you're tired of me doing that, you might want to tap out because I'm about to do it again. I do not think that Jax pressing the button to stay means that he actually wants to stay in the circus. I do not think that this was an active choice that proves that he prefers the circus to the real world. I think this was something impulsive, done in a moment of extreme emotion to try and regain some semblance of control, and it is not reflective of his internal opinions about the circus or about reality. You remember how I said that Jax will often respond to a bad situation by trying to regain control, often in a way that isn't very well thought through? And remember how I asked you to keep that aspect of his character in mind? This is where it comes up again. It's not super obvious until the end, but Jax has spent this entire episode freaking out. Jax's natural state is acting nonchalant and pretending that he's above everything happening. And when something happens that makes it seem like he does care, or even that he should care, he'll do something to regain control and bring himself back to a place where he's comfortable. If something happens to put him off balance, he immediately reacts to fix it, often in ways that are kind of excessive. But he can't do that in this situation because this is different. This centers around the one thing that he cannot act like he doesn't care about because anyone and everyone will rightfully call him out on it. This is the one situation where everyone will see right through him and they will be right. So he's put in this weird position of having to play along for once. Even though he's clearly bracing for all of this to be fake, a little bit of that hope starts to leak in, even as he tries to combat it. He starts to feel that hope for the first time in who knows how long, and it's terrifying. Jax is terrified because as time goes on, it seems more and more likely that this is real. They might actually all escape, and that's a big, fat, floating unknown falling right into the lap of someone who does not deal well with circumstances beyond his control. Jax didn't press this button because he was desperate to stay in the circus. He pressed the button because in the moment, he was desperate to be right. He needed this all to be fake because if it's real, what does that even mean? It was something he did in a moment of panic, running forward and pressing this button because he needed to do something to try and feel okay again. And then, before he can even begin to process what he's done, all is revealed. He was right. It was all a fabrication, all a ruse. And it hurts. It hurts, and it's awful, and he can't pretend it wasn't. Jax does what he does because in his panicked, desperate mind, he needed to do something to restore the status quo. He needed to do something to take them all back to the bright, cartoony land where consequences don't exist, and they are all just archetypes playing a part for Caine's entertainment. But pushing this button didn't fix anything. It didn't make the reveal hurt any less, and it's not going to stop everyone else from asking you a bunch of really uncomfortable questions. Questions like, why did you do that? What were you thinking? What if that had been real? Were you really planning on trapping us all here? Caine will probably try to avoid answering by saying that it wasn't real, so it doesn't matter, but I don't think the others are going to accept that this time. And it's going to be extra difficult because Jax isn't going to be able to explain himself. This is not the face of someone who can articulate their own behavior in this moment. If he hadn't been cut off by Caine right here, I'm confident that his response to Ragatha's "What did you just do?" would have been a stunned, "I don't know." I could be wrong about this interpretation. Maybe Jax really is terrified of going back because he's from an abusive household, or he hit a child with his car, or he crashed that car and he thinks he's dead and the circus is some weird purgatory, or something like that. But I really believe that based on his previous behavior, this was just a really stupid thing he did in the heat of the moment because he was scared. And I think if he was actually in the proper state of mind and not clearly panicking, he wouldn't have done it. With that said, I think there's something interesting in what Jax says after Caine's reveal. He immediately accuses him of being able to mess with their minds, which is honestly a little strange. This has obviously been on his mind for a while, but why bring it up now? There are plenty of things he could be yelling about right now. Why is this one specifically what he brings up? It's because in this moment, Jax is feeling kind of stupid. He laughs at the reveal because he was right, but it's manic and ragged because this time, the joke's on him too. In the back of his mind, there was a tiny bit of hope, and now it's been snuffed out. And Jax cannot believe that he was stupid enough to buy into this. So he doesn't believe it. Because surely there's no way he would have fallen for this under normal circumstances, right? No. He's better than that. He's smarter than that. This only hurts because Caine got into his head. Caine did something to him to make him believe this could be real. Jax blames Caine because he's in denial of the pain he's feeling. This whole episode he's been doing his best to convince himself that not only is this fake, he can also handle it being fake. Because if it's fake, then he'd be fine, right? He'd be proven right, and everyone else would be sad while he laughed, and all those pesky, complicated emotions he didn't want to deal with would just disappear. Except it does hurt, because Jax does care, and he's so deep in denial of that the only rational explanation for him caring so much is that Caine made him care. It's a desperate knee-jerk attempt to shove his emotions onto someone else, and it opens up the floor for everyone else to start asking questions too, and it only takes a few for Caine to get very uncomfortable. The end of this adventure clearly isn't going at all like he planned, and after Kinker drops a line about the first abstraction and he starts to process how truly angry everyone is at him, he runs. He summons a random gift basket, tries to speak coherently, fails, and leaves. And with him gone, we're left with only silence and end credits to keep us company. This episode reveals and teases so much in the last 2 minutes, it's honestly not even funny. Everyone is upset. Caine might be responsible for Abstraction, Kinger owes everyone a massive lore dump, and I'm just now realizing as I'm typing this that the only person who can enjoy those scented lotions is Ragatha because she's the only one in this cast of 6 with anything resembling a nose. This ending is a lot. This episode is a lot. Part of the reason that this video is structured like this is because I had no idea where to even start when talking about it. And now that we're here, it's hard to know how to end, either. I guess the only thing to do is try and guess what will happen to our characters next, which is really hard because there is still so much we don't know. But I'm going to try. On the subject of abstraction, is anyone going to abstract in the near future? Abstraction has been a big worry for fans for the last few episodes, and with how big this one was, the characters are bound to be feeling a lot of feelings about it. So, is abstraction something we need to worry about with these characters? It honestly depends. If abstraction works the way I proposed as a result of isolation and apathy mixed with how the computer works, then I don't think anyone is in danger in the near future. They all just went through a hugely traumatic event, yes, but this is an event that's shaken things up in a completely different way, and the characters are probably going to be pretty active going forward. To put it more bluntly, they are too riled up to let themselves quietly accept abstraction. They are literally too angry to die right now. Whether they yell at each other or Caine or whatever, I don't think they're in any danger of going gently into that good night anytime soon. On the other hand, there were some pretty big abstraction implications at the end of the episode, and if Caine does have something to do with abstraction, then it's still very much on the table. I'm not convinced that it's Caine's interference that always causes abstraction. I think it's probably more likely that Caine caused the first abstraction, and that fundamentally broke something in the circus in a way that made abstraction a danger from then on. Either way, assuming that abstraction is going to be a problem for the last 2 episodes, who is in the most danger? I personally think that Gangle, Zooble, and Kinger are the ones most at risk, and the reasons I think that are kind of meta. From a story perspective, both Gangle and Zooble have kind of completed their character arcs. They've opened up and found comfort and safety in each other and others. There's really not much more for their characters to learn. I don't want them to abstract, but out of everyone, these 2 are the ones who could be removed without it feeling like their arcs ended prematurely. As for Kinger, he very much has that old mentor who doesn't make it through to the end type vibe. He has valuable information for the cast, and I could see it going one of 2 ways. Either he's offed before he gets the chance to share what he knows, or he says all he needs to and then fades away once he's completed his purpose. The story could do either one for different reasons, it just depends on what type of story the series is telling. And there's also the fact that Caine clearly has some issues with him that are not resolved and haven't even been acknowledged for a long time. Abel isn't Caine, but I don't think that animosity towards Kinger came from nowhere. To get even more meta, we can take a look at one of the series' main inspirations, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Everyone in the Amazing Digital Circus except Pomni has an analog in the original short story, and the analogs for Zooble, Gangle, and Kinger are the first to die there. The Amazing Digital Circus is obviously a big departure from the short story. The biggest difference between the 2 in terms of characters is that Pomni exists. In the original, there were 5 survivors at the whim of an AI, and here, there are 6. And maybe that's what ends up making a difference. The next question is how everyone will react to what Jax did. Everyone is obviously angry with Caine, but their reaction to Jax has the opportunity to be a little more nuanced. I think the most outwardly aggressive will be Zooble. They already made it clear that they don't trust Jax not to mess this up, and now they seemingly have proof that he would have stranded them there if given the choice. But beyond that, it's honestly kind of hard to say. We didn't get to see much of their reactions because of the shock of Caine's reveal and the anger towards him. I can see any number of reactions forming. They might feel betrayed, numb, irrationally optimistic, just plain disappointed. Like many things in this episode, there's really no way to know until the next episode drops, as torturous as that is to say. Even the reactions to Caine might be more varied than I initially implied. Everyone is obviously upset, but what do you do when your anger has nowhere to go? What do you have beyond that? I still think everyone is too angry to be in danger of abstraction, but I could easily be wrong. If this causes anyone to withdraw into depression, there might be a lot of danger there after all. We just don't know, and there's not much we can do except wait and speculate. The only thing I think I can say for sure is that it's become clear what genre we're playing with. The Amazing Digital Circus is a tragedy. We were shown in the very first episode that there is no escape for these characters, and episode 7 just reinforced that. They aren't getting out of this place, and I don't think the tone is going to get more cheerful from here. Thoughts of all these characters escaping and living normal lives are fun, and I'm sure I'll be indulging in all sorts of fix-it AUs once the series ends, but the fact is that within the show itself, things will probably end badly for at least some of the characters. The only question is this going to be a tragedy about finding meaning despite the horrible circumstances you find yourself in? Or is it a tragedy where everything is meaningless no matter what you try to do? Will this end with them finding some semblance of hope? Or is this a faithful adaptation of I have no mouth and I must scream? Like so many other things, we don't know yet, and honestly, that's my biggest fear for the series. I worry that these final 2 episodes won't give us as many answers as we're hoping for. Gooseworx isn't exactly known for telling stories with coherent endings, and I don't think they plan to change that for this series, but at the very least, I think it'll give us something meaty to dig into. And when it does, I hope that we're all there together to hold each other's hands while our hearts get ripped out. Thank you all so much for watching. As I was writing this script, I kept thinking of things I wanted to say, and I still feel like I've only scratched the surface of what's going on here. If there's anything about the episodes you think I missed or that you just want to share, please feel free to put it in the comments. I love reading them, and I would love to see the different perspectives you guys have. I look forward to seeing what you have to say, and I'm hoping that this isn't the last time I get to make a video about this series. For now, I'll bid you adieu and say that I really enjoyed having you here. And I'd like to give a very special thank you to my patrons, including but not limited to Tree, Snick, and Perplexia Sphinx. Make sure to take care of yourselves and each other, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye!